Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another updated winner ranking after 5 years. This time I'll be updating my winner ranking for Australian Survivor, and this will only be talking about the Network 10 version of Australian Survivor. I will not be including 2002 or Celebrity. It'll be about the 10 seasons that have currently aired, where I am doing this after Brains vs. Brawn 2. Last time I did this, I believe it was after All Stars, where literally half of the series ago, which is kind of insane. But so again, I'll be ranking them here based on their winning games, not them as players. And I should say, for Australian Survivor, I feel like this is a relatively weak grouping of winners. I feel like Australian Survivor has not really provided some strong winners. And it's very difficult for someone to play an extremely dominant game on Australian Survivor, with it obviously being so much longer, and there being so many twists along the way, to where it just allows for more opportunities for players that play faulty games to actually make it to the very end, and for us to at least see more of those flaws, where even the best Australian Survivor winner here, I don't think is a truly elite one, but again, we'll talk about it. But really, I feel like the majority of AU winners here are ones that I would actually put in my bottom tier of winners globally, which is, again, going to make this list a bit strange. But either way, we got 10 winners to rank here, and let's start off at number 10. The lowest ranked winner of Australian Survivor for me is Christina Bennett from 2016. And obviously, I've talked about Christy's game a lot in the past. I have criticized her quite a bit. I do feel like actually over time, my opinion on Christy's game has maybe gone slightly up, not to the degree that, again, she's obviously higher on this list, but I do think she's in a spot where, while she, again, is not really part of any like core power structure really throughout the entire season, she does spend a lot of the back portion of the game really safe, in a spot where, again, we obviously see these other people being taken out over her, in a spot where, again, I think the fact that Christy survives that massive like pagonging of the people not in that core power structure is kind of impressive. Mind you, the rest of her game's still kind of messy. Again, early on, she's kind of dangling in the game, kind of looked at as a very emotional player, with her having breakdowns there at the swap. Again, she makes a ridiculous decision to take out Rowan over taking a shot at the other side that could have given her numbers and not be in danger for the next few rounds. And what do you know? She's in danger for the next few rounds. Mind you, again, not targeted over Cat, so at least there's that. But again, is with Phoebe when they take out Andrew and Craig. But again, plays the Craig situation very sloppily, to where it just makes the other side feel very betrayed by her, to the point where she's supposed to be voted out before the merge, only gets saved by Anonym, which is one of the main things here that really puts Christy lower on this list. The fact that, again, she gets completely saved by Anonym in the pre-merge. Really the only Australian Survivor winner to be directly saved by Anonym, though again, there's another one that we will debate, where again, there have been others that have been saved by other like random twists. But again, Christy's the only one to directly be saved by a round where just no one went home. And that's a criticism there, where while obviously she does flip the script and take out Phoebe next, it's still a spot where, again, she should have been gone to begin with. But again, once she gets to merge, again, she's being saved over the likes of Connor and Kate, again, the likes of Nick and Kylie and Anna Louise and Sue get taken out before her, which again, I think is a credit to her. The fact that she was not looked at as a threat by the others, the fact that she had this connection with Lee and Elle to actually survive through those rounds. And again, it gets her into a spot where, again, she's part of the flip against Brooke, to where, while she doesn't really do anything to cause that flip, again, she's still there. And then I think we get to the point where I've always criticized her endgame stretch, the fact that she actively goes to the final 3 against Lee and Elle. And I still do criticize it, though I don't think I do as harshly as I did before. I still think it is dumb to go to the final 3 with a duo that'll take each other in a spot where they have been the biggest challenge threats of the season, where, again, I think that is kind of a ridiculous thing to do. But I think something that I have gone higher on Christy over time is the fact that I do think she was in a spot where she was kind of forced into that position by the time of the final 4, in a spot where, again, she needed to go to the end of Lee, where I think Lee is her best case scenario for a win, and she, again, kind of had to take out Flick at 4, considering Elle had immunity. Now, I still don't think that was intentional. I still think there's definitely issues with that. Where, again, obviously a lot of people do end up crediting her with Fall Tribal performance and not pulling out the win, but for me, that's really just a whole bunch of nothing for me. Especially considering the fact that I think that only works because she's against Lee, someone who, again, the jury did not particularly like to begin with, and again, talked up how honorable he played the game, with Christy, again, coming off as the opposite, and through that was someone that didn't come off as hypocritical, even though, again, most of what she talked about was kind of a fabrication. But again, Christy, I still think plays a very flawed game. I still think she is the worst AU winner. But again, I have gone up on her over time a bit, just because I do think, again, it is impressive for not being targeted throughout that middle portion of the game, but I still think she makes some very bad decisions at points, and again, was supposed to be eliminated in the pre-merge, but gets saved due to a twist. So again, not a great game by the end. And again, she's at the bottom of my ranking here, number 10. Now, number 9, another winner, very flawed, also not directly saved by a twist, though definitely did get very fortunate with certain things played out. And that player is Shane Gould, the winner of Transfer Contenders. And Shane is a bit of a strange winner to assess here, in the sense that she also, like Christy, very rarely was in a true majority group. She was just kind of on the outskirts of whatever was going on for most of the game, to once she actually found her alliance with, again, the likes of like Matt Rogers and Sharn and Steve, again, that alliance gets flipped on and she ends up being on the bottom, to where, again, that is pretty bad. Mind you, I think there's probably less points where I have to like criticize Shane's game in terms of the strategic decisions that she makes. I feel like Christy obviously makes a lot more boneheaded decisions than Shane. Also, Shane doesn't have a point where she's directly saved by a twist. Mind you, I do think she gets very benefited at the Moana boot round, where that's a spot where Shane was primed to be taken out, and the votes just simply don't fall on her because of Moana. Mind you, she had an idol that she ended up playing, wasted in that spot. But still, it's like, again, she would have stayed anyway, but again, it would have been a spot where she stayed because of her idol. But instead, Moana goes home because Moana needed to quit. So I think in a more natural circumstance, that is a spot where she would have had the majority of the votes against her, which, while it is like more naturally baked into the format than an on-a-limb twist, it is still a spot where, again, she does get saved due to some lucky circumstances there. But either way, I do feel like Shane proceeds to, again, just be on the bottom for really a lot of the season. Again, kind of gets a fortunate swap, which allows her to bond a bit more with Matt Rogers, to where it at least puts her higher in his estimation, but still a spot where, again, like, she didn't really have a winning trajectory coming into the merge. And while again, the show definitely gives her credit for taking out Lydia, and I guess you can give her credit for that, it's really outside that. It's like she doesn't really have that much influence throughout the first, like, 2/3 of the game. And it really is until after Matt Rogers goes that she does some more better work, but still a spot where she's playing from the bottom. Again, like, she's able to pair up with Sharn, and she's able to, like, build this relationship with Brian to the point where, like, Brian messes up the split vote, which allows Sharn to play her idol correctly and snipe out Vanilla, which I think is, again, something I'll give Shane some credit for the execution of that move, though I also feel like some of that was like kind of unprecedented. But again, after that, again, able to get Shawnee to flip against Monica at 5 and get Sharn to take her to the end, which I think is probably one of the more impressive things of her game. The fact that, again, it was just such an easy win for Sharn against Brian, where, again, taking Shane to the end makes it a lot more difficult. Mind you, again, even in that spot, it did look like Sharn was going to win. It really wasn't until Sharn's like colossally bad final tribal that she loses the game. And really, that's also the thing to factor in here as well. The reason why Shane is so low is the fact that also, again, she kind of wins, not really because she does that much right at the very end, but more so because Sharn loses the game, and Sharn loses that respect from the jury at the tail end. I don't think Shane did that much actively to get that through. And again, between Shane and Christy, I actually feel like Christy was probably more stably safe throughout more of the game. But again, I think Christy was, again, saved by an on-a-limb. Christy also had a more rocky endgame path. Also, Shane probably having more win equity in more situations. I mean, while she barely wins against Sharn, she also, like, easily wins against Brian by the time in the final 3, where Christy, again, loses handily to Elle, and, like, really wins against Lee simply just due to her final trial performance. So where I think it's a spot where now I don't think there's that major of a difference between the two, but I do think there are those minor pros for Shane that, again, leave her above Christy here at number 9. Now number 8, and this is probably going to be controversial. People probably aren't going to like this opinion, but at number 8, I have the most recent winner of the season. I have Miles, winner of Brains of Brawn 2. And again, I see so much of people ranking Miles very highly. Again, having him like top 2, top 3 AU winners, especially when even when people clarify, oh, it's based on their winning games. When it's like, again, I think Miles' winning game is kind of bad, especially for a winning game. Where, I mean, for me, like, is there even that much of a difference between him and Shane and him and Christy? Where, again, he's on the bottom for most of the season, has very little actual control over what's happening for the majority of the season. He constantly tries things and fails at those things, and even needs 2 idols along the way. Mind you, again, you can excuse those idol plays. Again, he gets swap screwed for one, the other one's the Baron bounty twist, and he does get very unfortunate to be in those positions where he needs those idols, but he also gets very fortunate the fact that he even has that idol to begin with, that first one in particular, the one that he just literally stumbles upon at the challenge in a spot where he was even looking for the idol. He was instead actually trying to beg the other people to stop looking for the idol. So again, I think that is probably one of the most lucky circumstances any Australian Survivor winner has had, of him literally just stumbling upon it in the challenge, in a spot where, like, how many challenges ever have idols hidden at them? So again, had the idol not been in play, I think he just handily goes home there. Now, again, the reason why he is higher than Shane and Christy is because I do think he had a lot more agency in the game. He at least tried things. He got some things through. Mind you, again, I would disagree with his decision-making on some of these things. Again, the PD vote, I don't think was a particularly good move for him. It's one that he burns trust with certain fellow players. He does make a big move that increases his threat level, but I think he does so too early. And to be fair, I mean, again, that threat level is what leads to him going on to win the game, this perception that he is making these big moves. But again, I think it was the incorrect timing to do it, and I think it was a move just not worth making, especially when, again, you're willing to let go of Paulie anyway, which feels like the best aspect of that move is keeping around Paulie in the game. Yeah, again, you're just willing to drop him instantly and just waste that relationship. But again, then he proceeds to just make very sloppy plays that don't work out for him, and I even question if they were the right calls to begin with. Again, him trying to organize his vote against Kristen at the final 10, only just completely fail there. No one gets on board, which too fair. I think taking out Kristen wouldn't have been bad for him, but I do think the fact that he fails to get anybody on board with his plan there is really bad. At the final 9, again, he tries to lead this vote against Zara, only to once again completely fail there, where there's already this vote going on Karin by that point that he's just completely aloof to until Tribal, when at Tribal they decide to target him. When the Karin Zaras of the world decide to target him, which is bad. Also, you have the final 7 round where, again, he actually does get his way. He does lead the charge against Kristen, but I also question why take out Kristen that spot where you have Kate and Morgan, who are a duo. Also, Kate being someone that has a connection to AJ, to where you would want to sever that relationship. There again, I think that's just kind of an insane move as well, especially considering he's like so gung-ho over it and refuses to let anybody talk about any other plan, which I think was pretty bad. At final 5, I think his move to take out AJ is also astronomically dumb. I don't know why he would want to take out AJ at 5, or really he's probably the only person that shouldn't be taking out AJ, where AJ is just such a massive shield for him, and instead by taking out AJ, he just makes himself a bigger target at that point. Again, getting rid of his shield, but also now making another big move for his resume, to where, again, I just disagree with so many decisions that he makes across the game. Mind you, again, he does also make some good plays along the way. Mind you, again, he starts off on the bottom and the original brains, but by the end, again, he recovers there, takes out Allie. I think that was the right call for him. He's once again able to repair his relationships by the end of the pre-swap as well, be able to get with the men of that tribe. Again, I think he plays the final 8 round really well in being able to escape rocks and also keep an idol in his pocket. Well, I think he ultimately makes the right decision at 4 and taking out Zara, though likely Zara would have gone home either way. And also, again, I think he obviously gets Kaylin to take him to the end. Mind you, again, I still struggle with how intentional that really was, considering he tried to target Kaylin at the final 6. But still, Kaylin did take him, so I mean, that's something. Again, he survived through social strategy means, where, again, really in general, again, really Mouse's game here, again, I think it's a complete mess. I think he has so many points where he just does things and fails at them, other points where he does things and I think there's the wrong moves for him, other points where he gets saved by advantages in the game. And again, I just don't think there's really that much to truly praise from his game outside of his win equity. Or again, he's very rarely in a core power structure that actually ends up having that much control in the game. Even when he does, I don't agree with what he's doing with it. So again, I don't think Mouse's game is particularly good. I think it's insane that people rank him amongst the best AU winners. But again, for my list here, he's there number 8. Now number 7, kind of similar thing. I mean, someone that I actually think does probably less in the game than Miles, but also fails at less than Miles, while also being safer for the majority of the game. Mind you, I think this person's end game is very rocky. At number 7, I do have Liz from Australian Survivor Heroes or Villains. And Liz is a player here that I think plays a solid enough game really up until like the final 5. Again, she plays like a very competent game where she's in the majority group for the majority of it, almost never really the target. So again, that's something to be credited for. Mind you, I think she also, again, has some terrible strategic decision making at points. I think, again, the fact that she like actively wanted to keep Flick around and really strong arm George and keeping Flick around, while it shows her influence, I think it was a terrible move to be doing that. And she obviously gets blindsided when Shawnee goes home. But really, outside that, again, I think her game up to that point is active participant in the majority group. I think it would have been a game good enough to be like a middle of the road sort of winner, where I think it would have been a good enough game for like a second command style of winner. One, again, second command to Shawnee until Shawnee goes, but then is able to recover and be a second command to George. I think the problem with her game, though, really stems from the final 5 round on, where really on most given seasons, I think Liz plays a losing game. I think it's a season where, had this been a final 2, which most AU seasons are up to this point, Liz just outright loses the game. I think Liz is in a spot where he gets voted out of 4. Had this been a final 2 season, where in that world, the challenge that Matt wins, again, extra vote during the jury removal twist ends up being the immunity challenge, Liz just outright goes at 4 with Jerry, Matt, and George all voting her out in that spot. And again, I think that is a major criticism here. I think she is, in essence, saved by an on a limb. Again, not as directly in the way that Christy was, where Christy was like literally seconds away from being voted out, but still in the way that, had the season been formatted similarly to how almost every other AU season had been formatted, Liz does just outright lose the game on this season. And I think that is something that definitely is a major knock here for her as a winner. A reason why, again, while she is, again, 7 out of 10 on this winner ranking, pretty low in my assessment of her in terms of winners in general on Global Survivor, where, again, there definitely is credit to be given to her, because, again, early on in the game, she's right in the middle of the villains tribe. She's in a very powerful position there alongside Shawnee, and is safe throughout that entire portion of the game. She then gets swapped into a very unfortunate position, and to fair, kind of lets Jordy take the reins there and make a very bold move by not playing their idols. But anyway, she ends up surviving through that, and again, was not seemed to be poised to be the next boot had they gone to another tribal. And then again, she mutinies over, makes the questionable move in saving Flick. Oya then proceeds to take out Flick after the merge because she realizes she made the mistake. But again, blindsided the Shawn Evo, back with George, only to be blindsided again when Nina goes home. And again, it's just a lot of ups and downs, but to be fair, that's again the way the Australian Survivor typically goes. Where again, had it not been for those final few rounds, Liz would be higher on the board here. Again, probably closer to 4 or 5 sort of spot, but maybe because of how disastrous her endgame stretch is, and that she should have fundamentally lost the game. Again, she's more in line with the likes of Miles, who's someone that again had agency at points, had an alliance at points. I think Liz was actually more stably in the majority than Miles was throughout the season, but has some, again, very glaring asterisks in their games, which again, for me is why Liz is here number 7. Now number 6, and now we're moving on to the queen of asterisks in their games. At number 6, somehow I do have Haley Leak, which obviously this is another thing that people would debate, where I think Haley is someone that, again, some people have at the very bottom of their list, as Haley is the only AU winner here to be directly voted out and come back into the game. There are other people that have Haley towards the top of the list because they look at Haley as one of the best players in AU, and through that should be rated high. And obviously by this list, she's kind of in the middle for me. Not generally in terms of the general winner ranking amongst every global winner, as again, that's why she's still pretty low. She's still towards the bottom. But again, in AU, she's right in the middle. And again, that's more so an indictment against the winners of Australian Survivor. But again, Haley obviously has that massive asterisk. Again, she is in a spot where she gets voted out of the game, has to come back into the game. That is something that is not always guaranteed for every round of the game. Mind you, I think she gets very unfortunate to be voted out in the spot that she does. Mind you, I think there is also bad play that leads up to that, but I do think it's a spot where she gets very unfortunate in how Baden gets taken out of the game. Again, in a twist where Danny ends up being this sole deciding vote, which is just kind of insane. And that ends up weakening Haley's numbers to where she comes in the following round in a spot where she decides to throw George under the bus. And again, that ends up being very sloppy. And again, George leads the charge against her. Again, I think that is a spot where I think Haley plays that poorly, but I think it's a position where she's in because of a dumb twist beforehand. So again, I would definitely still knock her for that, but I don't think it is this complete demerit, considering I do think there are like reasons around that. But also I will criticize her not taking out Danny in the Simon Boot Tribal. I think that's a spot where like, why split the vote onto Danny if you're not going to take her out? I think that's also a question mark. And I think that's the thing with Haley's game. Again, there's so many good things she does. There's so many bad. I think she's a player that clearly is a very strategic player, one of the most strategically savvy players in the history of the game, but I think almost too much so, to the point where I think she creates so many schemes where I do question if some of them are generally good for her game, but I think it is still impressive that she's in these positions to enact these maneuvers. And again, like in comparison to any of the winners that we talked about so far, and she is the person with the most agency of these winners. Again, throughout, again, she has this big asterisk next to her name, like all the other previous winners that we've talked about. She is the person that would have been the highest ranked if it had not been for the asterisk. So where again, she is someone that, again, had it not been for the asterisk, she is a top tier winner. She is someone that is in a very powerful position for a lot of the game and ends up making some very impressive plays along the way. Again, her flip against Joey is a very strong move there. Again, flipping the bronze against each other and getting them to take out Shannon and then lead the charge against Simon, I think is good. Again, I would have taken out Danny, but again, still, like the fact that she was able to completely switch out her position in the post swap, I think is good, even though, again, also to be fair, there's also an aspect of it made it easier for her, the fact that 2 of her other brains were immune and it was really only her and Baden that were in danger and she had the idled, or again, there was definitely some rockiness there, but either way, post merge, again, she plays that merge round very well, working with George to successfully idle out Kez. Problem is, again, after that is where her game kind of goes downhill, but when she comes back into the game, she plays it pretty well, where again, in many spots, we see people getting voted out of the game, come back and be instantly voted out again. And instead, she's able to reacclimate herself into the game, find herself actually in more of a swing position for those next few rounds, and really is never in any true danger from that point on, where really the only danger point for her are those like final couple rounds. But again, I think she effectively plays the final 4 round, creates a 2-1-1 to take out Kara, which was a very strong move there, and was very likely to win that final endurance challenge. And even then, George would have likely taken her as well, to where she was not in that terrible spot at that point either, to where, again, I think Haley plays that stretch of the game very well. Again, there's a couple points where she's like left out of what's actually happening, like in George's play to save Kara, and you have the Way Boot Tribal where Haley isn't like fully aware what's going on, but she still does have these, again, really incredible moves along the way and has a lot of respect from the jury, and again, has some respect from the jury by the end. And I think she beats most people in the end game. So again, by the time of the final 4, where obviously she beats George, she beats Kara. Well, certainly not the biggest jury threat on the board. I think she at least had that respect from the jurors, to where I think at the end of the day here, for me, it's like, yes, she got voted out and came back to the game, and that is definitely a big knock against her. But I think every other winner we talk about at this point does have a big knock against them. Again, Liz's endgame stretch is like a fundamentally losing game on most given seasons. Miles had multiple idols he needed to save himself. Shane also would have been in a spot where she needed an idol, along with the fact that she kind of won more so because of Sharn's mess up at the end and anything she did actively. And obviously, Christy, again, would have been voted out in the pre-merge without Anana Lim. Where, again, all these people have big asterisks. I mean, really, none of these winners are outside of my bottom 2 sub-tiers of my 9 sub-tiers on my Survivor US winner ranking. Where, again, none of these winners are ranked highly for me. But I think Haley is the best of these winners with massive asterisks against them. So, again, for me, she's here at number 6. Not number 5. At number 5, moving on to a winner that initially I did have in this asterisk sort of spot. And I do think this player plays a very flawed game. Yeah, I do think there's enough like question marks with them to rise them above the winners with asterisks against them. But still, a winner I have a lot of flaws with nowadays. That winner is Pia Miranda from Champs vs. Contenders 2. And again, Pia is a player here that I think the first like 2/3 of her game is pretty good. Again, kind of like Liz in that world where, again, she's in the majority, not the most active player within that majority, but also, again, relatively safe throughout most of it. And again, Pia had that like little danger spot at the very beginning during that first round, but even then doesn't go home there. Again, like ends up forming this alliance against the sporty group and gets the majority there at the swap. Again, is given a very fortunate swap where she's in the majority throughout that entire portion of the game. At the merge, gets a lot of credit for taking out David, which again, I think was more of a joint effort, but still, again, definitely deserves some credit for that move. And again, plays a pretty solid like middle tier game up until the point where she gets blindsided, where Simon gets blindsided at Final 7 twice. And from that point on, she's on the bottom, barely survives over Janine. And then we get to the big round of contention for me, and that is the Final 5 round, where this is a spot where I've debated just how much to criticize her, where, again, this is a spot where she was primed to be the one going home. Mind you, primed to be going home because Luke was winning immunities. Luke was someone that would have gone home at a lot of these endgame tribals if he had not won immunities, but he continuously won. So, again, that is something to note there. But also, again, at that point, Pia was likely to go home. But then Luke plays this advantage to send essentially a safety without power that he uses on Baden. During that point, it causes, again, this crazy 2-1-1 vote to take out Abby. But it's still a spot where, again, it feels like she gets saved by a twist. And initially, I accepted that as, again, a asterisk to add to her, to where, again, she would have been closer to the Liz and Mileses of the world. However, again, doing some research into things, Baden has said that he actually was planning on actually saving Pia during that tribal. Plus also the fact that, again, like it was a spot where Pia was not the initial target for that round. So, again, I think I will give her like a little bit of grace for that round. Or again, it's a spot where there's still some unknowns there, along the fact that she was not the initial target. So again, I think it's not the worst thing in the world. And again, I think she plays the rest of the game well enough. Again, votes out Luke in a spot where she obviously had to. And again, gets Baden to take her to the end in a spot where, again, I don't know how much active work that was from Pia, and more so just Baden thinking Harry is the bigger threat. But again, she's still able to survive that final 3 rounds. So again, I think it just as a whole, Pia's game, again, just a pretty standard or like under the radar sort of winning game. Where, again, I think it's a solid second command game until the point where Simon goes home. And then from that point on, again, it kind of falls back into like under the radar tier, again, right above the tier with all these players with asterisks on them. So again, there's the debate if she should have an asterisk herself. Yeah, again, at the end of the day, I didn't. So again, I did put her above Haley. As again, her navigation through the game is a lot more stable. So even though I don't feel like she actively did much to really steer the game in her direction, but I think she was at least in the majority for long enough in the game to be here number 5. Now, number 4, similar thing, though slightly above, where, again, this is a person that I would put at the bottom of the middle tier of my general ranking, a player that I think had more agency throughout more of the game, though too far, probably a little bit more sloppiness in general, but not enough sloppiness to the point where they were actually in any direct danger, and that player is Jericho from 2017. And Jericho's just another one, again, a very solid middle tier winner up until the Luke boot, where again, he's kind of solidly with the majority, not necessarily in the like core group that's running the game, but in a spot where he's not in any danger. No one's ever talking about taking Jericho out throughout those early portions of the game. Everyone likes him. He does end up obviously using the cookies to build good connections with people, but really there's not much to really like praise him individually for those early portions of the game. But again, he gets the swap, never talked about as a target at the swap, despite the fact that, again, they go down to just 3 people by the end, and despite that, again, he's never talked about as a potential target. I think that is very good. At the merge, again, sticks with Luke and Sarah, pulls off some pretty strong moves along the way, stays in the majority until, again, he makes the insane 3-2-2-2 play in a spot where, again, it backfires. It causes his closest allies and Sarah to Luke go out. But again, I think that is a praise to Jericho here. The fact that he doesn't fall back on him. The fact that he had, again, Sarah and Luke as these kind of shields for him. To where despite, again, them being targeted right away, being looked at as like these chaotic players for making that move, he really gets almost none of the blame for that move and is able to remain safe coming into the final 5 and final 6 rounds, where obviously all the eyes are on Locky at that point and gets Locky out. At final 4, obviously he does need to go into fire, but again, he made such a strong bond with Tara where she's willing to give him the chance to go to fire there, and again gives him the odds coming into that final immunity challenge where Tara would have taken him. And again, I think just in general Jericho's game is good but sloppy. I think, again, there's definitely points where, again, I think he makes moves that are not necessarily in his best interest. Again, taking out Henry, who's someone that wanted to work with Jericho, is something I would question. Again, him obviously making that 3-2-2-2 play in the spot where they don't loop Michelle in, again, just completely backfires on him. But again, I think the rest of his game is like pretty stable. Again, he's just, again, stably in the majority for really the entire game up until like the final 8. And even at that spot isn't being targeted. Again, unlike the likes of Haley, Liz, Miles, Shane, Christy, there was never a point where Jericho was talked about as an actual target until the final 4. And even that's a spot where he had Tara to save him. And again, I think that is a spot where, again, I think his game is just so much more stable. Again, it's one where I definitely disagree with decisions he's made and do think he obviously overplays his hand at points. He also, again, has a terrible final tribal that loses him some jury votes. But again, I think Jericho's winning game here is just mostly solid, especially, again, in a world where we have so many flawed winners that we've talked about so far. While Jericho is flawed in his own right, he doesn't have a massive glaring hole in his game like some of these other people. So again, for me, he's here number 4. Now number 3, and now we're moving on to another winner that I do debate if this is a top tier winner or middle tier winner. I think I lean towards top of the middle tier, closer to my like semi-dominant winners. First person played a very impressive game, but a game that again had him in and out of the majority at points, and that player is Ferris from Titans versus Rebels. And again, Ferris plays a very impressive game. I mean, Ferris is someone that was really an expert of threat management. I mean, despite him being this like massive guy, seemingly big jury threat, someone that people looked at as like the leader of his alliance, he was somehow able to avoid being targeted for a lot of the season. I mean, there are definitely some low points for Ferris, which is the reason why I struggle to put him as like a top tier winner, just because, again, while he does play like the early portions of the season well, he is in the initial majority against PETA, he almost organized a vote against Rihanna, only for her to be saved by a non-elim. He then ends up losing the battle at the swap, and I think this is definitely something to criticize him for, the fact that he is being on the minority at the swap. He ends up losing Garrick. He gets very much helped by that twist in episode 10 where Charles ends up going home, where that was a world where, while he wasn't going to go out in that tribal, it did seem like Eileen was about to, and he would have been dead man walking. Mind you, he had an idol, so again, he still had an idol to save himself, but still, he would have been in a very rough position from that point forward. But I do think he plays pretty well starting from the Kelly vote round, where again, he's able to mend fences with Kirby, re-solidify his bond with Kirby, and through that, they're able to really run the post-merge game pretty effectively, where again, he ends up flipping the vote onto Winna, where again, he ends up leading the charge and taking out Winna at the merge. He then is able to get the Rebels to come back together to take out Eden. He is blindsided when Eileen goes home, and obviously that's like a knock, but even then, it was never a spot where like Ferris was meant to go home. It was just a spot where Eileen was going home because they wanted to weaken Ferris, but not actually take Ferris out. Again, Kirby always intended on going to the end with Ferris, which I think is definitely a thing to praise him for there, where beyond that, again, he really runs the game alongside Kirby. While again, he is technically blindsided when Jaden goes home, it's again another spot where like it's not meant to be against Ferris. It's more so just because Raymond feels like he needs an individual move for his own game. But even then, like, he's able to get Raymond to take out Valeria during Raymond's big move, and then from that point on, again, and really from that point on, he's pretty stably in the majority as they take out, again, the likes of Alex, the likes of Rihanna, the likes of Kitty, in a spot where, again, he's able to defend against Caroline trying to make a move against him. He then ends up making the call to take out Kirby, and while that puts him in a rockier endgame position, it also makes him a very clear person to win if he gets to the end, where while obviously gets very unfortunate in the fact that Raymond loses fire, where had Raymond won fire, he pretty handily goes on to win the game, where again, that ends up putting him in a final 3 position where he needs to win final immunity. He does ultimately do that and ends up winning the game, where I think Ferris, again, a very rocky game. Again, definitely not a stable enough game to put him in the top tier of the list. I feel like he's one that, again, has a lot of ups and downs, but I think his post-merge is strong enough to where, like, again, there's not really a point where he was any direct danger until the final 3 round. That was even based on some unlucky circumstances around him, and even then, again, early on in the game, he was very well positioned. It really is that, like, swap phase that's a little bit questionable, along with, again, a couple votes in the post-merge where he's not fully in on what's happening, but he also, again, isn't really being talked about as a target, to where, again, I think it's a strong game, especially considering his win equity at the end. So I would say it's a semi-dominant game, which is why he's here at number 3. Now, number 2, top 2. 2 players I would put in my top tier of my winner ranking, both dominant winners. Though the first one here, a bit more flawed. This is one I would put in my bottom sub-tier of my top tier, where there's at least like a glaring question mark about this player. And at number 2, I do have Mark Wales from Blood vs. Water. And again, Mark is a winner that you see ranked somewhat low on a lot of people's lists, where I think a lot of people just obviously don't want to rate Mark high because Mark, who likes Mark, I don't. But really, I think his game, really up until the final, 8 round where Sam goes, is just again, just straight up dominant. He's alongside Josh and really running the show for that entire time. Builds this boys alliance to keep shields around him. While obviously, again, it's not a fun strategy to see all the men come together and make sure they don't take out the strong men. It's still a very effective strategy. And it's one that Mark has to utilize to make it deep into Australian Survivor. And I think he does that very effectively on this season. Now, again, I think something to criticize him for is the fact that it did seem like Nina was someone that was more loyal to Josh, and had Nina not been medevaced, I do feel like there is a world where Nina leads the charge against Mark deeper into the game. But again, that's something that we just have so many unknowns about, to where I'm not really going to dock him too much for that. But again, it is definitely something to note here. But again, from the final 8 on, his game becomes very rocky. And I think this is a spot where, how much do you criticize him for this? As again, I think there's a world where obviously you look at this as an asterisk. The fact that, again, he loses Sam, he ends up kind of needing an idol along the way. Mind you, again, it was put on him because they knew he had an idol, not because they generally wanted him out of the game at that point. But either way, and again, there's a lot of rockiness in that endgame portion. There's still a world where if there was a final 2 on this season, does he go on the win? It's a question mark. However, for me, the way I interpret this endgame is kind of similarly to Tony's endgame in Winners at War, where it's a spot where, yes, it's a rocky endgame, but it's rocky because of a twist, one that directly arms his game. Again, it's rocky because the likes of Jordy, KJ, and Shay are able to come back into the game, where had the game just played out naturally, they stayed out of the game like they were meant to, Mark probably has a much smoother end game and is probably able to play out a mostly dominant game. Where again, I think that is a thing that, again, you definitely knock. Where again, it's still a thing that I definitely take into consideration. While there are definitely these qualms that would put him towards the bottom of these more dominant winners, especially in a spot where, again, unlike Tony, where again, I think Tony just steamrolls easily to the end and wins and Winners at War without that twist. I think with Mark, again, there's still some question marks there. Where again, Josh and Jordan, were they really going to take Mark to the very end? Where is Christy going to go? Again, I think there are at least question marks there, but I still think it's a spot where, again, I think Mark's game is, again, very strong for the first 2/3 of the game. And even when it gets rocky at the end, it feels like it gets rocky because of a twist in the game that this favors him. And even then, he's able to persevere through it and actually make some pretty good moves along the way. Again, at the final 5, but where, again, he should have gone home. He's able to trick KJ to not voting for him and essentially accidentally sending herself home. And I think the criticism of, again, he would have lost if it was a final 2 is one that, again, I just don't think we really know. Considering, obviously, in the world where if it was a final 2 and he had voted out Josh at 4, Shay likely wins that final immunity, takes him out of the game. I think the issue with that debate is that I don't think, and I believe Mark has even confirmed this himself, that he doesn't vote out Josh at 4 if there was a final 2, where he likely ends up sending Josh the fire making with Chrissy, and he likely beats her, to where at that point, if Shay wins that final challenge, she probably takes Mark to the end. And again, Mark will beat Shay. To where, again, even in that world, I think it's still a spot where, again, it's just not fully known exactly where things lie. To where, again, I would not say that's a major criticism against him. To where, again, I do think Mark's winning game here, again, is strong. I think, again, there are a lot of question marks, but I still think it's a spot where the pros very much outweigh the negatives. And I think he plays a fairly dominant game on this season. So again, he's here at number 2. Now, number one, Australian Survivor, winning games. Unshockingly, David from Survivor All-Stars. This shouldn't be that shocking, I don't think. Mind you, I do think David's game on All-Stars is a tad overrated. Where I think a lot of people talk about David as, this is one of the most dominant performances in the history of the show. David's played one of the best games ever. And it's it's good. Again, he runs the show for a decent chunk of it. I think there's also a lot of sloppiness in it, particularly in the pre-merge. I think his pre-merge is actually very rocky, where, this is a spot where, again, we see him be in a very good position on the original Makuta tribe. He seems to be the one, running the show. The problem is that it seems like part of that is a fabrication, where, again, his entire big play to work with Matt Rogers and take out Daisy, while it's a very impressive move, and we see it play out in a spot where the edit, really praises him for doing so, it seems like the reality is that everyone caught on to the fact that he was doing this, and that they were planning on sniping out of the game had they ever gone to another tribal, but they obviously just never got that opportunity. To where, again, I think that is something that I would definitely criticize from David. Also, at the swap, and there are clearly ramifications for the move that he made previously, where clearly Phoebe isn't all in on working with David, and even then, I think he burns Phoebe in a way that did feel pretty questionable. And again, he is largely just kind of aloof during the early portions of the post swap, to where while by the end, again, he's able to build a bond with Mo. He is able to get into a pretty good position from that point on. It's still, again, a position where I do think he isn't really in this like dominant position that people like to make you think he is at that point in the game. And once we get to the merge, again, he is in a dominant position. Again, he is towards the top of the power structure of the merge tribe. Again, he's somehow still being able to play the middle coming into that merge vote. And really from that point on, outside of the Zach vote, he really is able to control every little thing that happens from that point on. Mind you, doesn't mean that's a flawless game, even at that point. Again, I mean, obviously during the Zach vote, again, he just outright is blindsided, mind you, due to a vote split, but still unaware of what's going on there. He does get to a potential rock draw situation at final 8. Mind you, I think he plays it very well, but the fact that he was even in that position to begin with, to where again, he was in a dominant position, only to then lose out in numbers to the point where he theoretically had to go to rocks at a point. Again, I think that is bad. Also, I think his endgame is a little bit rockier than people like to talk about, where, again, David is in this spot where he goes to final 3 with Mo and Sharn, in a spot where, again, he votes out Tarzan at 5 under the concept that Tarzan won't be able to beat Brooke in the final immunity challenges. But it's like also one, like with Mo, I don't know if Mo's beating Brooke in these final immunity challenges. Well, also, Mo's less loyal to you than Tarzan, where, again, I personally would have very much voted out Mo over Tarzan in that spot. I mean, because, again, in the spot that we see play out is then left in a final 3 situation against Sharn and Mo. Again, friends from before the show, where in a spot where Sharn would have taken Mo to the end, Mo, again, has not fully said what she would do, but I think it's very likely she takes Sharn to the end, considering their friendship outside the show. So again, I think David puts himself in a very rocky position where he needs to win final 3, which again, I get his logic in the sense that obviously, again, he needs someone to help take out Brooke, but I don't think it was a spot that was worth taking a duo to the final 3 that could potentially snipe you out of the game at that point. So again, I think in general, David's game, again, very good. Number 1 winner for Australian Survivor, but I think there are flaws in his game that people don't commonly talk about that, again, makes him not really that high in my global list. Again, like, he's number 1 Australian Survivor. On my global list, like, I don't even know if he's top 10. Like, really, I think he's a worse version of Jeremy. I think he's probably even, like, a worse version of, like, Tyson from my US list. So, where, again, I think his game has enough flaws in it to where, while it is a dominant performance, it's one that isn't just him just running the show from beginning to end. But, again, when talking about just Australian Survivor, again, it's not that close. He is by far the best winner the show has had up to this point. So, again, he's here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my updated winner ranking for Australian Survivor. Now, again, I will also be doing an updated season ranking, hopefully in the near future, so stay tuned for that. Along with also a ranking of every Australian Survivor player at some point. Again, that'll happen eventually. So, again, stay tuned for those things. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.